All right, here we go. We have Gerardo Lopez, formerly of the notorious MS-13 gang. Now, this is the first time we've actually interviewed someone from MS-13. So I just want to go into the history of the gang first, because not only is MS-13 known for the extreme violence, but they're also known for being singled out by Donald Trump in order to deport South Americans in general and children in particular without due process.
Right.
So let's go ahead and get into the whole history. So MS-13 started in the 1980s.
Correct.
Okay. And talk about sort of the situations that caused the group to form initially.
Okay. Well, I guess to talk about MS-13, we have to understand the history of what happened in El Salvador first, which was the white people decided to form MS-13 or Free El Salvador. Before the Civil War even started in El Salvador, it was a right-wing government fighting against taking land away from the campenseros, the farmers, if you will, in El Salvador. And they got tired of it, so they started to unionize and started forming their own groups and fighting against the government. And this happened for several years. And as time went on, there's other uprisings that were coming up in Latin America as well, fighting against their government because they felt oppressed as well. And during this time, it was just chaos in El Salvador, and the United States intervened because they were fearful of these countries in Latin America becoming communist or being, during that time, Soviet Union influenced for them to become communist countries. So they started funding this civil war, and aftermath of the civil war, there was hundreds of thousands of deaths. When kids went to school or when they were just around the neighborhood, they saw these wars, bombs going off, walking down the street, seeing bodies being decapitated. It could have been their friends, their family members, or people they just didn't know, but they saw all this violence all together. And late at night, military soldiers from the government will come into the people's houses and try to take away their kids for them to be able to join the military. So these were kids that were 10, 11, 12 years old that were now taught all these things that the government was trained by the School of the Americas in the United States, that all this training came into El Salvador, which is a brutal training, if you will. So parents had no choice but to go ahead and flee El Salvador to a safer country. So they were refugees and they came into the United States. And some of these kids were sent by themselves to go with their aunts or their uncles, and a lot of their kids, their parents had already died. So they went into a neighborhood where pretty much in Pico Union, Koreatown in Los Angeles, where there was already violence, there was already gangs, and there was already drugs. And there was not a whole lot of opportunity for a youth to be able to survive all those things that were going on. So as the gang formed, these kids started going to school, if you will. And when they started going before the gang formed, these kids started going to school, and they were being made fun because of their dialect. Now, the dialect of Salvador is very different from the dialect of Mexico. If a kid from El Salvador tells somebody, hey, ¿qué onda cerote, to a Mexican, the Mexican guy's gonna feel very offended. The same way if a Mexican kid tells a Salvadoran kid, hey, wait, ¿qué onda? The Salvadoran kid's gonna go ahead and get offended. And then you have the Chicano American kid who speaks both languages, and the Chicano will go ahead and be the kid who's born in the United States, but their parents are from some country in Latin America. So there's bullying because of the way they talked, and it was a strange culture to the people living in the neighborhood. Not that just Chicanos or the Mexicans, but kids from other different countries as well. It was somewhat of a culture clash, if you will. And there was a group of kids, not all the Salvadoran kids, there's a whole lot of Salvadoran kids that didn't join MS, but the way that it started was the Salvadoran kids started forming their own group called MSS, which was Mara Salvatrucha Stoners. And the gang started as a protection for anti-bullying, if you will, against other people within schools. And these kids started fighting back. But it consisted of it was more of a heavy metal gang where they went to these concerts like the likes of Black Sabbath, AC/DC. And when they went to the concerts, they saw people that had the ripped up jeans, the shirt with the tongue hanging out, the long hair, head banging and going like this, which was the MS sign. So they adapted that heavy metal sign, which turned out to be the famous MS sign, if you will. So when they were in the street, now you have this group, and they started hanging around in the street, and other gangs took a notice of them that they were uprising, if you will. So from smoking weed to heavy metal, now they were being assaulted by these other gang members, if you will. So they started defending themselves. They started getting locked up. Now, when they started getting locked up, they were still being made fun of because they were saying that they were in a gang, if you will, but they looked like heavy metal people that were going to those concerts. And right there, this is the movie, this is the time when the movie Colors came out, right? You saw the dress, the Nike Cortez shoes, Dickin pants, the Pendleton shirts, the tattoos, the shaved heads. So from right there, they started adapting this style and the tattoos as well. And they also began to learn the language, if you will, English, because a lot of these kids, they came over when they were 10, 11, or 12. And when they got deported back to El Salvador, when they got off that plane from El Salvador, it was like, you know, rock stars coming off that plane, that kids started seeing them because they were dressed like the cholos from the movies. They had the tattoos and they spoke English as well. So of course the girls right there, you know, they flocked to them. The kids saw that the other girls were flocking to them. They wanted to go ahead and be just like them. So when they landed in El Salvador, it was a whole different culture for them because a whole lot of them were already in the United States for several years. That was their home. And El Salvador, it was a strange country to them now because their family ties wasn't as grounded, if you would, because a lot of their family had got killed in the Civil War. So they had kids, then they had their life in the United States of America, so their plan was to always try to go ahead and come back, but at the same time, there was people that began to jump people in over there in Salvador, and that's how the gang continued to grow and grow.
So the name MS-13, what does it stand for?
So M is Mara, and the S is Salvatrucha, and 13 is obviously the 13th letter of the alphabet for the letter M.
Okay. Now, does that have something to do with army ants?
Well,
you see what I'm saying? Like there was the Marabunta,
right,
is AKA an army ant, which is considered one of the deadliest really animals in nature. It's basically, it would eat through anything. It would attack anything and just run through anything, flesh, you know, plants, whatever, in order to get to what they wanted. Is there some sort of connection to that?
You know, if you continue to see the history of what MS stands for or MS is, I remember sitting down in couches like this right here, and people will go ahead and talk and try to make images of something and try to portray it even more and more, you know, giving it more spice to whatever it was. But there was some talk about those ants as well. But Mara in general is a slang word in El Salvador, like saying, where's the Mara at? Like, where is the group? So Mara was even before a word that is a Salvadorian word that was even formed before MS started. So that's how they got the Mara. And Salvatrucha is slang for Salvadorian.
Okay, so in order to join the gang, there's something called a beat-in.
Right.
And it goes for 13 seconds.
Correct.
Where they basically, all the other gang members will beat on you, and then after 13 seconds, you're considered part of the gang.
Correct.
Okay. Now, you know, you talked about the hand signs, I guess called the devil's head.
Well, again, it consisted of, the hand sign was copied from the heavy metal rock concerts that were right there in Salvador. So nobody knew what it really was. They just saw everybody going like this. And in some Metallica stuff, that was the time when the Metallica music was deemed satanic,
right,
devilish.
Yeah, Motley Crue.
And
Shout at the Devil. And
right, all that stuff.
Yeah, satanic imagery and heavy metal were kind of going together in the 80s.
Right,
I remember all that.
Right,
yeah.
So when you go like this, it's also like that. And then it played in well within the gang because it did consist of during those times with the devil's horns. And then it consisted, if you turn the hand sign upside down, it's an M as well.
Ah, gotcha. Now, along with the hand signs came the tattoos.
Right.
Now, in 2020, seeing a rapper with a bunch of face tattoos is considered normal. But back then, you never saw it.
Right.
And MS-13 guys were like the first ones that I really saw with very heavy face tattoos.
It evolved. Like, I remember being in juvenile facilities in the early, about 1991, 1992, when I was locked up in Central Juvenile Hall, Los Padrinos, Silmar, went to camp. And there was some people right there already that those face tattoos, there was some East LA gangs that already had it. A lot of the people that were actually known for the face tattoos were the people from 18th Street as well. And again, that was just another step that MS-13 began mimicking, if you will, of other gangs to try to go ahead and fit in. Because again, the gang did not start in El Salvador. The gang started with the LA culture influenced in the United States. And if you remember back in the days, we're talking about the 60s or something, the first tattoo of a gang member was probably like a teardrop or a smile now, cry later, or brown pride. So they started copying the tattoos from there. But yes, absolutely, MS-13 did take it over the top, if you will, with the face.
Yeah, I mean, you see, MS covering an entire person's face. You see the horns on the head. You see the 13. People's entire faces tatted up. That's considered somewhat normal with MS-13, whereas it's not quite as common when you see like the Mexican Mafia or the Crips and Bloods and so forth.
Well, there is. I will say, regardless with the horns, but you make a great point, because I do see that. But going into the stuff that I was seeing, like let's say in Los Angeles, there is some people that you see, with the MS tattoos. But when you go into El Salvador, now we're talking about MS-13 El Salvador, then yeah, absolutely, there is everybody, almost a whole lot of people right there have those MS tattoos in their face.
Okay, so these kids, they come over to the U.S., they get in trouble, then they get deported back to El Salvador. Now, before MS-13, there wasn't any significant gangs in El Salvador,
correct,
from what I understand. But then once MS-13 starts coming back, they were the rock stars.
Right.
They had all this cool American things about them, and everyone started to really kind of copy them. Not copy them, but want to be involved in what it is that they're doing. Now, during this time, it's kind of an interesting time in El Salvador, because I guess there's something called the Chapultepec Peace Accords. Did I say that right? So basically, after the revolution had been finished, the Salvadoran government was required to stop using the standing army as a police force and form a new national police service. But the ruling party, Arena, it was kind of the descendant of the wartime military government. So there was a delay in creating the national police force. And by the time it was finally formed, there was kind of like a lack of a police in El Salvador. So as the MS-13 guys were kind of building up power, there was no real police presence to really go against them. Is this kind of accurate in terms of what's happening?
Yeah, well, absolutely. The thing also was that they were just trying to recover from a civil war, if you will.
Exactly.
We're facing poverty. We're facing a whole lot of deaths, murders, trying to even reconnect families, or somebody trying to even survive a day of what they're going to eat or where they're going to go ahead and live. And now, with all these deportations happened, now MS has this, now MS started right there, and it's an uprising, and they don't know how to go ahead and deal or handle the gang culture. So absolutely, MS members did take advantage of that to continue to start that uprising over there in El Salvador, because of the lack of resources over there, law enforcement wise as well. But then also, they did start, the way that they figured out how to go ahead and combat, they did start making these government groups, which was like the Sombra Negra. And what we have right now is the militant groups that they're called Grupos de Eliminación, meaning that they're just right there mainly to hunt MS-13 members. So if you're going, there was a time when people were getting deported, and the Salvador said, we can't handle this, how are we gonna handle these issues? So if you were from MS and you were getting off that plane, the militants, the Sombra Negra, will go ahead and disappear you from, as soon as you got off that plane, and go ahead and kill you. And if you were with your family, they will go ahead and kill them as well.
Yeah, no, I was watching a lot of documentaries about this, and you see the guys that are basically ending up back in El Salvador, and they're like, hey man, my friend got deported 6 months ago and he was killed right away. So they kind of don't know what to do. They may not want to join back into MS-13, but they're scared for their lives against the police.
Absolutely.
So they end up joining the gang just to survive.
Right.
So it's kind of a catch-22 situation.
It is.
So along with, the Civil War had just ended in El Salvador, there was all these weapons all around the country, and it wasn't really controlled at the time. So you had all these guns, all this heavy ammunition, and essentially MS-13 became arms traffickers during this time. Is that accurate?
I I never heard something of to that extent. That they have access to some guns? Absolutely. But I think also we have to understand where these guns came from. They didn't come from El Salvador.
Came from America.
They came from America.
Yeah, and I'm going to get into that. It's really kind of ironic how, America has this problem with MS-13, but they kind of created MS-13 indirectly.
Right. So a lot of it is like there's just havoc in El Salvador. Now, who is it that we're going to go ahead and blame this stuff at? Does MS-13 have a fault to a certain extent of starting the gang right there? Absolutely. Absolutely. But then also, what was the opportunity for a kid to even not wanting to go ahead and get a gun and defend themselves when he saw that there was no type of youth activities and there was people in sweat labors or sweatshops getting paid very low wages to be trying to able to go ahead and survive?
Now, violence is one of the main attributes of MS-13, but not only violence, but violence involving minors seems to be a major theme, with the victims being minors as well as the suspects for the actual killings being minors as well. Why is there such a focus on children?
Well, it's the gang culture, I think. When I was 15 or 16 years old, the people that we were assaulting or attacking, it was kids killing kids. And when you start thinking about MS-13, sometimes you do have this picture of what's been portrayed to you as the mean-looking gang member with the face tattoos, and you will think that this person is 20, 30-something years old killing these kids. But in reality, it's youth from a certain gang fighting against kids from MS-13 too, which a lot of times we forget that these people from MS-13, they're also kids as well, and they have done some horrific crimes as well. And the victims that you do see, like the stuff that you're probably talking about recently from the East Coast, it's kids that are having situations with other kids at some schools that they're the same age, and the way that these kids are letting out their aggression, or the way that they saw from the aftermath in the wars in El Salvador, is through that extent of violence.
Well, MS-13 starts to spread to other South American and Central American countries.
Right.
And the violence was really just off the meter. There was a situation in Honduras where I guess the Honduran government wanted to restore the death penalty. And there was a situation in 2004 where a whole bus was sprayed up.
Right.
28 people dead, 14 wounded. Most of the passengers were women and children.
Right.
Six different people just sprayed the bus with guns, and then another person actually went on board on the bus and just started executing people. A guy named Juan Bautista Jimenez, he was accused of masterminding the massacre, and then when he got to prison, he was actually killed by other MS-13 members. Buses would get burned up in broad daylight for going to the wrong neighborhoods. Police would be targeted. Government officials would be targeted. It got to the point where the Supreme Court in El Salvador actually classified them as a terrorist organization. And there were really situations where there was presidents in El Salvador that would have to negotiate with MS-13 to try to lower the killings and so forth.
Absolutely.
So it really, as big as MS-13 was in the U.S., in El Salvador, it became a major entity.
Right.
And you're familiar with all this type of thing.
Correct.
But why do you think that it became so huge in El Salvador, considering that it started in L.A.?
Well, a lot of it consists of the deportations that we had, of the immigrant people being deported. If they had any ties to, if they committed any type of crime like in 1995 or 1996, you would go ahead and get deported, even if it was some type of misdemeanor. And when you continue to just have oppression to try to go ahead and fix a problem, a gang is notorious as MS-13, but your strategy is just to go ahead and try to kill them or try to go ahead and push them away from that town they're just going to go ahead and a nearby town, but nobody went ahead and focused on the rehabilitation of the gang member. Nobody went to continue and focus on what's causing MS-13 to continue to spread. Was there the lack of opportunity of resources, of jobs, of even mental health, social services in El Salvador? There was really none of that stuff. So in order for us to be able to stop the MS-13 from continuing to form, we have to go ahead and give opportunities for other kids that want to go ahead and to get into other gangs and give them opportunities for them to think about not joining that gang and say, you know what, here's this job, here's this this youth facility, or here's this mental health services, or here's this this curriculum or this program that's going to help you through the healing that you grew up seeing throughout your life. Or how do you go ahead and parent, or how do you go ahead and be a good parent or a good citizen of society, if you will. So we have to go ahead and start focusing on the rehabilitation. And again, in El Salvador, there was none of that. So it's going to continue to form, whether it's MS-13, where it's other gangs. It's just going to continue to uprise as well without those resources.
Well, MS-13 was growing, but it was somewhat disorganized, I guess. It was cliques, friends doing various things. But then in 1990, a guy named Ernesto Deras came around. Are you familiar with him?
Might have heard of him.
So he was actually a former member of the Salvadorian Special Forces, and he was trained in Panama by the United States Green Berets. And once he actually got into MS-13 and started becoming a leader, he actually used the military training that he learned from the U.S. to actually organize MS-13 into more of an organized gang. No, you don't know about this at all.
Well, I haven't heard of it, so I don't think one person will have that pool to go ahead and organize the stuff like that. You always hear about MS-13, about militant people joining the gang.
Yeah.
When I grew up, I would probably say 1% to 2% maybe where they had some type of militant influence. But there wouldn't be one person who went ahead and said, okay, now this is a whole military operation. Because if that started in El Salvador, then that would have probably trickled down to the United States. And
well, this was actually in the United States, from what I understand.
In the United States?
I believe so, yeah.
No.
Okay, so maybe I'm wrong about that. It's just very ironic, though, that the Green Berets taught a guy who ended up using that in MS-13.
Well, the School of the Americas taught a whole lot of not the guerrilla, but the government in El Salvador on how to go ahead and use the tactics over there.
Well, at what point did the beef with 18th Street Gang start?
Well, it started, there's different stories to it, right? These are like folk tales, if you will. And the one that's probably more accurate to me, and just like gang stuff, sometimes it starts over a girl. You took my girl,
that's what I
now
heard.
she's messing with you.
Because at one point, 18th Street and MS-13 were actually friendly with each other.
Right.
And then a situation with a girl.
A situation with a girl happened at a party, and I believe it was an 18th Street member that got shot. And that went ahead and started the war between MS and 18th Streets.
And that's now spread into other countries as well. So in El Salvador, you have 18th Street.
And in El Salvador, you have 18th Street, you have 18th Streets in different parts
different parts of the world.
In different parts of the world as well. And this war, probably about 9 or 10 years ago, there was a peace treaty in El Salvador where the government in El Salvador was negotiating with MS-13 members and 18th Street members right there. And they were starting to, and what they were asking was the stuff that I just said right now about mental health services, better food, or being able for both gangs to see their families as well, some type of better clothes. And when you're in El Salvador, I mean, you're wearing what you're wearing for weeks upon months. So as soon as the United States caught wind that the government was dealing or negotiating with the gang members, the government in El Salvador went ahead and got scared off and said, no, we're not dealing with them. And that's when the talks stopped. And in Salvador, I believe the murder rate right there was, it was about 15 per day. When the peace treaty started, you were having 1 or 2 per day, which, I mean, that's still bad. I mean, anybody being killed is still bad, but you could see the demographics, changed as well.
I mean, it's just interesting how these wars will start over a girl.
Yeah,
like for example,
unfortunately.
like in LA, you have the war between the Rolling 60s and the H-Ray gangsters.
Right.
And that started over a girl. A girl was seeing, a guy from each of these crews. A fight broke out. Someone got killed. Then the other side retaliated. And then 30 years later, you have literally hundreds of people dead over a couple of teenagers
Right.
fighting over a girl
Right.
who, probably went on and messed with someone else right afterwards.
Right. And a lot of times it's trying to even understand what that girl was going through herself.
Yeah.
Why was she even there? What was the pain that she was going through as well?
Yeah. Well, by 2004, the FBI actually created an MS-13 National Gang Task Force.
Right.
So they actually started working with law enforcement in El Salvador, Honduras, Guatemala, and Mexico, and actually had an office in El Salvador to deal with this. By 2008, they set up a series of arrests and crackdowns all over the world that involved like 6,000 police officers in 5 different countries. 650 people were taken into custody. So you just started to see these worldwide sweeps that was coordinated. So it became a very serious thing.
It did.
Do you remember this time?
I do remember this time, and I remember, let me give you a little, just to talk about a little bit of history of that. I remember when I came out of California Youth Authority, YTS, in 1997. I was about 18 or 19 years old. And I was walking around my street in Koreatown, my old neighborhood, and any given time before I got locked up, you would see 5, 10 MS-13 members late at night hanging at a certain blocks. And during this time when I got out, I was all like, damn, what happened to all my homies? Because there was a turf war between MS-13 and MS-13 in 1996 over a certain street that was drug trafficking. And a lot of people wanted to be in that, and a lot of people didn't want to go ahead and drug traffic and say, you know what, this is our clique, go to your clique. So MS and MS started fighting. There was deaths, there was killings, and some people from MS didn't want to be part of that. So a lot of them moved away. Some of them just calmed down, stopped banging, and a lot of them got locked up as well. And I remember the Rampart crash officers, they will go ahead and pull me over and tell me, damn, Clever, my nickname, if you will, what happened to MS-13? That turf war went ahead and killed you guys. And I was all like, wow, and you will only see a few homies. So as time went on, during a few years later, then the FBI did wage the war on gangs. So you need a perfect villain for that. A lot of times the immigrant community are the ones that get that short end of the stick from generations upon generations upon generations. So this villain that they created from the gang was the person that had the MS tattoos. So they started showing the MS-13 person, the tattoos, on the TV, just plastering this person's face all over the thing, thinking that this person was living right next to you, when a lot of times these MS members, these tattoos were people that were in prison in El Salvador that had never even stepped foot in the United States. But of course, there was also violent MS-13 members in the United States as well. So now when they continued to plaster the crimes of MS, they started putting it in a pedestal. Then the National Geographic came out with the world's biggest and most dangerous gang with the face tattoos as well. And kids that wanted to be from a gang, they say, wow, well, if we're going to go ahead and join a gang, we want to be from the biggest and what's being portrayed the worst, the baddest gang. That's why a lot of times I go ahead and say, when I'm asked, is MS-13 the world's biggest and the world and most dangerous gangs? No. And also you need to go ahead and stop promoting and putting it up in a pedestal like that, because then you have these kids that do come from broken families that do want to go ahead and join, that end up want to go ahead and do that. But in 2003 also, there was an informant from MS where there was these other uprisings. There was an FBI informant, and there was these other uprisings in different states in the United States, and there was no connection between them and and California or El Salvador, it was Central American people that were flocking to other country, to different states. And again, not all of them got into MS, but when these kids did feel isolated and did have that culture shock, how MSS started in the 1980s, they started upbringing and said, oh yeah, so they weren't even getting jumped in or nothing. They were just claiming it because they were from El Salvador. So this informant from 2003, 2004, the FBI paid his plane tickets. They were giving 50 to 60 annual salary to go ahead and see what was going on with these other groups. So what this guy did, he pretty much connected the dots from state to state to state, and then connected the ultimate dot to El Salvador, that line, and that's how that started to get more organized, if you will.
Well, by 2011, the task force had made 20,000 arrests. By 2012, the U.S. Treasury Department froze all the assets with anything connected with MS-13. And they actually listed MS-13 as a transnational criminal organization, which took it to the next level. And then by 2015, El Salvador had the highest national homicide rate per capita in the world. More people were getting killed in El Salvador, were getting murdered in El Salvador than any place else on earth.
Yeah, horrible.
I mean, that's kind of mind-blowing when you think about it. There's a lot
horrific.
of countries out there. There's a lot of war-torn countries out
Right.
there. There's a lot of gangs all over the planet. Every country has its own gang and so forth. But El Salvador in particular, with MS-13 being the biggest gang in El Salvador,
Right.
is contributing to more people getting killed than any place else. When you hear that, how does that make you feel?
Well, it makes me feel it's horrific, you know. And given that all that stuff, it goes back to the pain of saying, how do we fix this? Because I remember even in LA seeing those murders. I mean, there was years in LA where there was 300, 400, 500 people a year getting killed. You know, a lot of my own homies and, you know, enemies as well. But it goes back to the thing of it. It's almost like an everyday thing. It's watching like the movie Groundhog's Day over and over and over again. And we continue and say the murders, the killings, the chaos, but we need to start talking more and more and put more and more efforts into rehabilitation tactics and giving people opportunities so they won't go ahead and join a gang. But it feels that sometimes we're, us as a country here in the United States, we want our hand in different things, and we try to go fix something that's already broken, and we end up shattering it because of the same continued tactics that we have continued to use in from generations upon generation in Latin America, was whether it's against MS-13 or just different uprisings that they feel as a threat, or that we feel as a threat from overcoming or becoming a communist country, if you will. We're starting to see how is it that we're going to go ahead and fix it. And a lot of it is just the same tactics of oppression and oppression. And it's the same tactics that we continue to use in our own country right here in the United States of oppression and oppression when it comes into the situation of how do we go ahead and get that guy out of a gang? Let's go ahead and lock him up. Let's go ahead and throw the key. And when this person goes into prison to try to go ahead and find some form of rehabilitation, there is none. There is none, right? So how are you going to go ahead and come out of prison and be a functional member of society, if you will, when we're not focusing on the preventative part? We're just focusing on the punitive part, if you will.
Yeah. Well, eventually MS-13 spread to New York,
Right.
to Long Island, and there was a series of murders that happened, and the weapon of choice was a machete.
Right.
You know, the district attorney in New York said the crimes we're talking about are brutal. The weapon of choice is a machete.
Yeah,
we end
horrible.
up seeing people with injuries that I've never seen before. You know, limbs hacked off. That's what the bodies look like that were recovering. And these were not adults. These were like young girls, teenage girls. They were getting chopped up and killed in the forest.
Right.
The guys that were caught would be like 13, 14 years old.
Right.
So it's basically children hacking up children.
Right.
When you hear about these stories, knowing that this is an organization that you were once connected to yourself, how does that make you feel?
It's horrific, if you will, when you go ahead and hear something like that. I actually went to those high schools where that stuff happened.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yes, there was a New York police commissioner that found out that I was over there doing some work through my organization, and they reached out to me and my longtime mentor, if you will, Alex Sanchez, who's part of Homies Unidos, a former MS-13 member as well. And we went to the school and we talked to these kids and we had a healing circle for them. And a lot of times the strategy of that right there on how to go ahead and find healing was go ahead to, a lot of the government officials went in there, they got the kids and they deported who they felt was involved. Or a lot of it even consisted of somebody with a Salvadorian background there on Facebook. They were just showing the pride of the Salvadorian flag. But it's horrific when you hear something like that, not just in MS-13, but even when you hear these stories in general with other gangs, or you hear stories like that even don't have to do nothing with gangs, right? It's just the human being attacking the human being. But to go to even the history of the machete, because it's constantly being portrayed on the news and the media, the history of the machete consisted back in the days in El Salvador, even before the Civil War started, where it's a tool that farmers used in El Salvador
to get through the forest,
yeah, so they won't go ahead and scrape their hands. And when that tool from the machete, when the uprising of the government come in, the farmers didn't have these weapons or guns. The way that they knew how to defend to themselves was the easiest access to them, which was the machete, if you will. And then the machete, and the kids remember the machete as when they were kids in El Salvador, and when they came over here and the MS members saw that, and now you have a gang that's uprising, but you don't have the resources yet to go ahead and buy the guns, with other gangs already had guns and they went to go ahead and try to attack. And for them to defend themselves, they remembered how these farmers, if you will, defended themselves, and that's when they got the use of the machete. But if you go into even the more history of the machete, how it's been used throughout Latin America, not just for killing, but it's a famous tool that has been used for farming, or for the branches, or for cutting stuff up that didn't necessarily mean people. But even to take it a step further, the machete has always been glorified, even when Jason had it in the movie, if you will, right?
Friday the 13th, yeah.
Friday the 13th, if you will. It was I was scared when I used to see Jason.
But that's a movie. This is real life.
But then it comes into the thing. But a lot of times in the movies, we have to go ahead and be careful what we go ahead and what people portray. Like, remember when the Colors movie came out with the gangster image, people wanted to go ahead and copy that image as well. But absolutely, any killing, that a kid does with everything, I mean, it hurts you, right? It devastates you just to hear that somebody will actually go ahead and go to that level of hacking somebody with a machete, or any type of way, if you will.
Yeah. Well, from reports, MS-13 comprises about 1% of the total gangs in the U.S. But the Republicans kind of took it upon themselves to really use MS-13 as a tool to try to change laws that they wanted to change.
Right.
So, Republicans started to accuse Democrats of being responsible for the violence of MS-13, and started asking for stricter immigration policies because of MS-13.
Right.
They started to argue that sanctuary cities, which is places that don't deport people, was contributing to MS-13 activity.
Right.
Although, they did studies on this, and there's actually no relation to the two. In fact, in sanctuary cities, there's actually less crime that they found. But it started to go with this whole narrative that Trump started to pick up and run when he was actually trying to get elected. And then once he became president, MS-13 became a top priority of the Justice Department. Mm-hmm. Did you feel that when that started to happen?
Well, I remember seeing it and me, shaking my head. I was like, I can't believe that this is happening over. It's history is starting to repeat itself, because that's the same stuff that I saw on TV when the MS-13 gang started to die out in Los Angeles, and then the war on gangs started, and then now it was being put on a pedestal, if you will. So it's kind of history repeating itself, and not only are you using that image of MS-13, but like you say, it's being portrayed to go ahead and say, this is how all the immigrants look. This is how everybody from El Salvador looks. If we go ahead and don't stop or we don't build the wall, all of these people are going to come and they make it feel like they're going to be in your backyard or right next to you. So absolutely, like I said, it's been a tool to use immigrants, people of color as a scapegoat, but this time they were, they took it to a whole different level and say, you know what, we're just going to go ahead and paint this face as well and say this is the immigrant face, if you will, and then we put the MS-13 tattoos, which was an actual person, right?
Yeah, I mean, in the process, you started seeing some very kind of disturbing things. So Trump's organization started using this MS-13 reason to start locking up kids. There was an interesting documentary that I watched on PBS. There was a kid named Junior, who was in New York and in Long Island.
Right.
Someone accused him of being an MS-13 member.
Right.
When they went through the investigation, they found that he had written 503, which is the El Salvador area code, in his notebook one time. He got suspended, and they told him, look, just sign this little paper saying you're MS-13, and you can come back to school next year.
Right.
These are all undocumented immigrants.
Right.
So no one really wants to go to the police. No one really wants to have the law involved. They just want to quietly live in the U.S. and not get deported.
Right.
So with this teenage kid here, he signed the paper, and before you know it, he got sent off to a detention center for 6 months.
Right.
By himself. He tried to kill himself, tried to hang himself.
Right.
So then they stripped him of all his clothes and made him just basically sit naked in his cell. Then he found some glass and tried to cut his arm to bleed to death.
Right.
The ACLU came and filed a lawsuit on his behalf. And one of the California judges actually sided against Trump. And then they started reviewing all the charges. 26 kids had their charges dropped, and his charges got dropped. But this is somebody who was just a good church-going kid,
Right.
who got hemmed up in the system, and this started happening over and over again, where kids were getting separated from their families and getting thrown into this pile
Right.
of gang members, of dangerous people,
Right.
in order for Trump to actually get rid of what he felt was undesirables in this country. Well, what's your take on that?
Well,
And have you heard stories like this?
I have, and I remember reading about that story as well. Kids from Central America being, let's say those kids in that school, it was obviously kids that also had that culture clash right there, and the people that they could relate to were the Salvadoran kids. Sometimes we have culture clashes between the Mexican kids had over here, the Salvadoran kids had over here, the African Americans over here, the Chicano kids right here. So this kid automatically flocked, if you will, to the Salvadorian kids, and unfortunately there was MS influence right there. And now when you hear kids now saying that I'm from MS, I don't jump to the conclusion that it's this machete wielding MS-13 member that's just gonna go ahead and hack you away. A lot of times it's these kids wanting to get that clout, if you will, within the school to probably look good to a girl or to go look to their peers and say, oh yeah, by the way, I'm from MS-13 also. And these other kids will go, then they get that sense of belonging, that sense of acceptance. Now they're part of a group where they feel that they go ahead and belong. And then with this stuff, this kid told a school teacher, if you will, hey, I'm from MS and I'm from MS-13. And that's how that went ahead and happened. But I've seen a lot of stories where even when I go do intervention with a kid that's saying that they're from MS, a lot of times I go down to the point of it where I, talk to them and I say, so in reality, you're not from MS, right? And a lot of time, no, mister, it's just that it sounds cool and and I'm tired of being bullied at school also. I want to be a part of something. So if I'm safe, I'm from this gang, I'll go ahead and do it. If I put on my Facebook page and portray this image of myself, people will probably go ahead and leave me alone. And these kids don't understand that, unfortunately, if you go ahead and throw up an MS sign, if you go ahead and start faking the little kid that cried wolf, if you will, the feds are going to go ahead and take advantage of that or take it serious to a certain extent. And you're going to end up being in custody of the same thing that happened to Junior. And then Junior was an informant, right? He gave up the are we talking about the same kid that
I'm not sure.
Okay, because
sure.
there was also another kid that started working with the FBI, if you will, and he started giving intel, and he thought he was gonna get that Ray Liotta deal, if you will, from like the Goodfellas, where you put up and all this, so you're gonna get trust in the boat. But after they got all the information from him, they turned him over to INS, and then he was facing deportation. And recently, I believe that he was deported back to El Salvador. So where is the way out? You give information, you get turned over to INS because you weren't born here, and you still get deported. And right there in El Salvador, then you're probably going to go ahead and get killed. And a lot of times, not necessarily. Perhaps from MS for you being an informant, but then you have these elimination squads that if you have any type of MS on your jacket or MS tattoo, if you're from it or not, they're gonna go ahead and kill you as well, if you will. It's like a kid that goes ahead and gets out of MS, right? And he's not from El Salvador. Let's say you get out and everything, but then INS still doesn't care and comes to get your ICE, and you end up getting deported as well.
Yeah, I mean, I've seen some of the documentaries about MS-13 guys in other countries that, the guys that have their face tatted up, they're such a target to the police.
Right.
They literally don't leave their house for years.
Yeah.
They sit in their house and run their operations. They send their guys out to do whatever, but they literally cannot leave the house because as soon as they walk outside, the police or the hit squads will come in and just either kill them or put them in prison forever.
Yeah, and what's happening right now in El Salvador with the current administration right there, it consists of the same oppression of saying, okay, we're going to go ahead and kill off these gang members. And before you go into the neighborhood and you arrest or you kill the gang member, and then, your military group leaves. Now what they're doing, you kill or arrest the gang member and the military groups stay. So now what they're doing, these guys from MS, they're being pushed out into the mountains, if you will.
Yeah.
So now you're totally away from civilization, if you will, and you're on survival mode.
Yeah.
And if you're on survival mode and you're right there seeing how you're gonna go ahead and survive, your mentality from over there to over here, if all you're thinking about is violence, then it's gonna be, without getting any type of mental health for that, it's gonna be pretty bad, if you will.
Well, Trump, when speaking about MS-13, he said, these aren't people, they're animals. Mm-hmm. This is talking about people like yourself, like your friends, like your family members. He's calling them animals. How does that type of verbiage really affect a whole group of people?
Yeah. Well, being a former MS member, I believe that we're all human beings, right?
Yeah.
When you go into the history of times and times, the stuff that governments or regime or whatever has even done to indigenous people, of the killing of millions of people, right? Not just Native Americans, but even when you go into the Holocaust, if you will, that's animalistic behavior, if you will, as well. But it's, again, portraying the image and giving somebody a label, if you will, right? So it went from the gangster, where we label the gangster a thug, right, and say this is the thug, this is the criminal, this is the good for nothing. Now we're gonna go ahead and put the face of the immigrant, and not necessarily they were probably talking about MS-13, not just right there, but it was a low key thing to say the immigrant is the animal. They want to go ahead and take it to a whole different extent. But going to that, I believe that nobody is an animal. I believe that people are human beings.
It's a lot easier to put an animal in a cage than a human. So you consider someone an animal, you have less qualms to put them in a cage, to put them out of their misery, however you want to do it, because these aren't really people, right? They're just animals.
Right.
We kill animals every day for whatever reason.
Right. Perfect. Yeah, perfect example right there.
Okay, so let's go ahead and get into your story. So you were born in LA.
Right.
Which part?
In Koreatown, Normandy and 8th Street to be specific.
Okay. Now, your mother, you said that she had worked 14-hour days in a sweatshop
Correct.
to support the family. Where was your father around during this time?
So I never met my real father, but the person that I thought was my father, he raised me until the age of 3, and he was in and out of the picture. They had their issues within the household, and I found out like at 11 years old or 12 years old that he wasn't my actual dad. But he was a great dad when he was in the picture.
Okay, where was your real father?
You know, I never met him. I understand that he's from Argentina. I would guess he was just never in the picture.
Your mom never explained the story
My
behind
mom
it?
never explained the story, and I remember finding out when it was time for me to go ahead and play baseball, and you had to show your birth certificate to the little league things, and then the name wasn't the name of the dad that I thought was my dad. It was the same name of my little brother, my step brother. My stepdad's name was on the birth certificate, but yeah.
Do you think that there was something inside that bothered you, that your own father had abandoned you and wasn't in your life, that maybe made you look for a father figure in the streets?
I th- there might have been something like that to a certain extent, but again, the father that I had, my stepdad, he used to take us to Disneyland, to Magic Mountain, to ball games, carne asadas. He used to
Okay.
just give me money. He was there.
So you had a father figure.
Yeah, I had a father figure for sure, and I think when I started going into the streets is I took my mom's love for unconditional love, and I took advantage of that. And I took that as like mandatory, if you will, some type of way, or for granted. And it was more me being curious. And there was a time also where I used to even get bullied by the MS members as well. So it was kind of trying to find my own identity and try to gain that respect, power, and pride, if you will.
So at 13, you were walking down the street and a MS-13 member put a gun in your face
Right,
and robbed you.
right.
That was the first time something like that had happened?
Specifically, I will go ahead and probably say, yeah, something like that to me. But me seeing it as a kid, even younger than that, I remember hearing the gunshots and even seeing the shootings as a kid or people getting shot at.
Okay. So you have a gun pointed at you.
Right.
Did they take anything from you?
Yeah, they took a Michigan jacket that my mom had bought me. I guess they liked the M in the back.
Yeah.
That was the time when people were wearing like the Hoyas, Michigan things in
Yeah.
LA.
So you get robbed at gunpoint. And you basically have to wake up the next day and go back in this neighborhood where the kid that robbed you is still probably moving around somewhere.
Right.
So now you're feeling a sense of danger, I assume?
Right. No, absolutely. It was just going from point A to point B just to even go to the school. I would have to jump over neighbors' fences so I won't go ahead and see gang members. Or when I got to the point where I couldn't go to the local fast food place because there was gang presence right there. But as soon as I left that neighborhood and went to another one, there was another gang over there, and then another gang over there, and then another gang over there. So I was kind of walking between the lines. Everywhere where you turn, there was some type of gang violence. I just happened to have lived right there in the MS neighborhood.
What were the other gangs around there outside of MS?
Well, you have different gangs such as drifters, alley boys, Aslan, Mid-City, Playboys.
Okay, these were all Chicano gangs.
These were all Chicano gangs, right?
So in your neighborhood, you started to see the MS-13 guys being celebrated. I guess there was a guy in the neighborhood that everyone really looked up to.
Right.
What was his name?
Nelson?
Nelson. So you're seeing this and you're getting affected by this type of praise and stature. So you actually decided to join MS-13 yourself.
Right.
These were the Normandy Locos.
Right. Well, I initially went into there was a clique called 7-Eleven, then I got into the Normandies.
Okay. You were jumped in?
Correct.
13 seconds?
Yes, it was 13 seconds, right?
Okay. How bad did you get hurt?
You know what? It wasn't. I seen beatdowns from jump-ins, and I was all like, man, the guy really got it bad. But I seen other jump-ins where I was all like, okay. And I seen other jump-ins where before the jump in, this friend talks to this friend and says, hey, you better count faster, right? You got me? You got me, dog. So it's different things in that nature. And my jump in was 13 seconds, but it wasn't something while I was laying in a puddle in the floor. I think it was 2 or 3 guys that jumped me and a couple more of my friends in. And the reason during that time, it was like the tag banging days where, different taggers or people were starting to join gangs, if you will. And me and my other friends said, you know what, let's just go. If we're going to join a gang, let's just go ahead and join MS, the one that's the biggest and most dangerous, if you will. And that's what happened.
You were 14 years old at the time.
14.
So your street name became Clever.
Right.
Why that name?
I get asked that a lot because I chose the name and then I got into the gang and I kept getting arrested. And I remember the people in there, hey, why did they call you Clever, man?
I thought you were clever.
What happened? And I was like, I don't know. Even the other gang members, why are they calling you Clever? And the reason that I came up with that name was because right before I joined the gang, the night before, you're thinking about, okay, what's going to be your name? Or they're going to go ahead and give you your names. And if you're from MS, I mean, the history of the MS stuff, I mean, there's guys that have been named, Chancleta or Palo de Coco. I mean, there's some names, right? And I didn't want to be called Flaco or Smokey because everybody has that name already, if you will, or Largo. And I went to a unique name, and I was like, for some reason, I was writing stuff down, and I was like, okay, I'll just go ahead and put Clever because nobody else has that name. So I wanted to go ahead and be unique. And the reason that I chose that name Clever was because I knew that I was gonna get arrested. I knew that I was gonna go ahead and go to juvenile hall. So when in juvenile hall, you got your respect and you got your rep by fighting. So in there, and there's different cliques from MS, so I didn't want to be confused with somebody else's name or that person taking my credibility that I just fought this gang member, if you will.
Okay, and your mother is Salvadorian?
No, so my mom is from Mexico, from Michoacan.
Aha, and your dad's Argentinian.
And my dad's Argentinian.
So you're not Salvadorian at all.
No, I'm not Salvadorian or that. And the father that raised me was Colombian. And if you want to mix it up even more, I was born and raised in Koreatown. When there's different cultures of Korean, Japanese, Asian, Hondureños, and, all sorts of places from Latin America.
Okay, so MS-13 doesn't restrict its membership to Salvadorians?
In the beginning, it was predominantly an MS group. And the reason they started joining MS because there was other gangs that didn't like the liking that they were from Salvador. They weren't accepted because of that. But as time went on, I was like the end of the first generation, kind of the beginning of the second generation, where I was one of the few that started to get MS-13 with the Chicano background, if you will.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so now you're officially MS-13.
Right.
So you have the protection of your homies,
right?
But now you have all the other gangs,
right?
Where you can't just turn around. When they ask where you're from, you can't just say nowhere,
right?
Now you have to say I'm MS-13,
absolutely.
And if you're enemies with that particular other gang, then it's on site,
right? Yeah, absolutely. Perfectly explained. And the problem with me was as soon as we got in, we're like, okay, now I remember getting into MS and being jumped in. And when I remember being jumped in, all I could think about, because there was a carnival that came to the neighborhood in Artmore Park. It's called like Seoul International Park or something. And they came every 3 months. And as I got taller in MS, I started getting robbed for my stuff. It was full of MS members. Now me and my friends that we used to play baseball with, they couldn't go to this carnival anymore. And we used to hide or we couldn't go. So now I remember watching from my grandma's house, everybody having fun on the Ferris wheel and everything like that, me just watching from the window. So now when I got into MS, now I'm able to go to this carnival. Now I'm able to go to this fast food. If I want to go to school, it's point A to point B. But a couple weeks later, I started to regret my decision because remember how I'm telling you that I walked through other neighborhoods as well. There was other gangs. And every time when they stopped me, they asked me where I was from. And I said nowhere, right? So they gave me that free pass, if you will. But now they have found out that me and these couple of friends that was a little bit known within other neighborhoods because other kids walking around, they found out that we were from the gang. So now we friended MS-13, but we enemied, if you will, everybody else around us. So now we couldn't leave the neighborhood. Now we had to stay right there confined to this certain neighborhood.
Yeah. Was 18th Street an enemy of MS-13 by this time?
Yes.
Okay. So now, and that was considered your main rivals.
Correct.
Were you running into 18th Street during this time?
Well, there was times where cars would roll up. It was from different gangs, if you will. It was that machismo, if you will, versus that machismo of whose gang is tougher. So you bump into them. Most of the times when I bumped into 18th Street members, consisted in juvenile camps or juvenile facilities or CYA camps. I remember them always being one of the deepest gangs. It was always like 7-1 or something. You know, the ratio of 18th Street versus MS.
Well, how much violence happened in that first year?
I will go ahead and say there was a lot of violence, you know, but to me it was nothing well, it was different in a sense because now you're the MS-13 member and you're experiencing it directly. But me growing up in LA, growing up there since I could remember, there was guns, drugs, there was violence, there was shootings, there was killings. I remember being 6 years old one time and there was MS members trying to take over the territory of another gang right there. And there was guys that were dressed in heavy metal with the long hair, the Metallica days, if you will. And then they did have the machete, if you will, and started hacking away at the rival gang member there as well. And late at night, I could remember hearing the gunshots. And when I was trying to do my homework, the ghetto board just circling around. So violence within my neighborhood to me wasn't rare. It became rare it was new to me in the beginning when I understood what violence, but then it almost became just like another day at the office. You would always just have to look around and watch for your back.
Right, but now you're expected to commit the violence.
Right.
Were you involved in shootings?
No.
Never. Were you shot at?
I was shot at probably about 15 or 20 times.
Were you hit?
No, I was never hit. I remember one specific time where I was being shot at. I was drunk and high, and I was going home, and there was a car probably from sidewalk, on this side of the sidewalk, and I was on the other side of the sidewalk, and it was late, and it was probably 1, 2 in the morning, and they passed by, and they were like, "Hey, homie, you're slanging." And as soon as I saw that it was a bunch of gang members within the car, I knew that the thing was for me to approach the car and for me to shoot me, right? And I was walking around, I was like, "No, I'm not." And I remember the guy going outside of his car window and pulling the gun out. And I remember seeing the fire come out of the gun before I heard the sound. So I ducked and I started jumping fences. Back then, I remember being shot at. You start being able to climb all kinds of stuff that you think you didn't climb. You're unsurvivable if it has barbed wires or not. And I'm jumping and I'm falling and I'm bleeding everywhere. I'm falling to trash cans and I'm running. This guy's dumping right behind me. And then I try to get away. I get away and then he gets back in the car and they circle. And then I'm seeing the car just passing by like this. And every time it circles, I run a block. And I live like 3 blocks down. And I finally make it home. And when I make it home, I see my mother and my grandma with candles right there praying. Right? And that's when, and they were like, "Did you hear those gunshots?" And me not wanting to go ahead and worry them. I was like, "No." And that became, a norm as well.
Well, you started getting tatted up.
I did.
With your gang.
Mm-hmm.
Where was the tats going initially?
I would say the first one that I got was in my elbow. It was an MS right there, and I believe I got that one when I was in a juvenile facility. I think in the California Youth Authority.
Well, you got locked up at 15. You went to juvenile.
Right.
At 15. What did you get locked up for?
I believe it was for a drug charge and an assault.
Okay, so you started dealing drugs as well at that point.
Well, we were under the influence of drugs, and we had some drugs in our pocket that we were using to get high of. But with the dealing, I never really dealt. You hear these gangster stories, you see these Scarface stories of the amounts of kilos and the pounds of cocaine. But I remember most of the people that I saw, they were selling nickels and dimes in the drug corner, right? And when I was selling nickels and dimes in that same drug corner, I think I remember making the most in a day, probably in a night, probably about $300 to $400 if you will. But it wasn't. I wasn't making $300 to $400 consistently. It was okay. I'll work this night, and 2-3 days later I go that way. So if I probably worked in a fast food joint and getting minimum wage, if you go ahead and put all the demographics and stuff like that, I might have been making more money doing that.
Okay, so then you get locked up, you go to juvenile.
Right.
But you're not just a regular, a kid from the suburbs who gets in trouble.
No.
You're MS-13.
Right.
And then you got 18th Street.
Right.
And then you got whatever other gangs have problems with MS-13.
Right.
How deep was MS-13 in juvenile at that time?
There was some in the streets. It seemed like there was a lot deeper. But then you had generations upon generations of gangs that it felt like a lot of times we were outnumbered. It felt that every time it was a couple, 2 or 3 of us. The most I was with MS-13 members in a pod or in a juvenile camp, I think it was 5. That was the maximum.
So not a lot of you.
People. Not a lot of
You
us.
guys were the minorities.
We were definitely the minorities right there.
Okay.
And not only not only was I from MS, if you will, but I was a Mexican with an MS. So somehow they even took that as more of a disrespect, if you will.
Yeah.
So you're getting locked up, and I'm not gonna lie, it's a new experience to me. I'm getting locked up. I mean, you're like, damn, how is this gonna go? You're scared, if you will. Now you start remembering what your mom and your grandma was telling you, if you will. But then you have to go ahead and prove yourself. And then one fight led to another, and then another, and then another, where you just started fighting and trying to get your respect like that.
So how much time did you spend in juvenile that one time?
I think I did 6 months.
Okay. You didn't tell anybody.
Right.
So you come out, and now you got your stripes. You did your time in juvie. You didn't snitch on anybody. Now your status is raised in the gang when you come back home. Mm-hmm. So now you're a bigger gangster now.
Right.
How did that feel to come back to the neighborhood after doing some time?
It's almost like I came from a long vacation and everybody was just so happy to see you. And I remember walking down the street. It was the best way that I could explain is that sitcom from Cheers, where everybody knows your name and they're always glad you came. I felt that aura within you when you have 10, 15, 20 people, kind of applauding you, putting out the red carpet, even the ladies, even the people from the neighborhood that knew you before you were from a gang. And then your little brother walking around with you, and this kid's just looking up to you. And then and then the girls, if you will, as well, like the homegirls, hey, what's up, clever? And it was just a natural high, if you will, like you came back and you're being applauded and recognized for what you did.
Well, you said you were actually ready to die to protect your neighborhood.
Right.
It's kind of ironic because I assume your mom was probably renting her house.
An apartment.
An apartment.
An apartment.
So you're willing to die to protect a neighborhood that you don't even own.
Right.
You're just renting.
Yeah.
Land that you have no ownership or claim to, but you're willing to give up your own life for this rented piece of land.
Right.
Does it seem a little crazy now that you think about it?
Absolutely. It's definitely crazy. It makes no sense. And at the time right there when I was trying to look for an identity or, being in that camaraderie, if you will, with your other friends, back then it made a lot of sense for us, unfortunately.
Yeah.
Because that's pretty much, I wouldn't say all we knew, because I never had that lifestyle where you hear these horrific stories where, kids were beating or being abused, when they were younger. I don't think my mom ever hit me. It's just me taking all that stuff for granted. But the stuff about just me being caught up in that cycle of violence and me not wanting to be the victim anymore, but more of the perpetrator, if you will, I started to look beyond that stuff. But no, you bring a great point. It makes a lot of sense. It doesn't make sense now,
What was the most violent thing that you were involved in?
I believe it was fights. With me, I was never much of a gun person or anything like that. I was kind of more of fighting. Gangs will fight. We will fight in parks.
With weapons or just with a fist?
A lot of times it would be with fists, if you will. Somebody would probably bring a baseball bat, a cane. People would bring bottles, whatever they could go ahead and bring. but I don't remember people bringing guns. Maybe it's probably people to break up the fight shot a gun up in the air. But I was really known for fighting within the juvenile facilities, and I guess because I was so used to that, that's kind of what I brought to the street as well.
Well, you were not getting shot, but your friends were getting killed.
Right. Well, I was getting shot at, but I
Shot
wasn't
at,
getting
but
hit.
you weren't actually getting hit
Yeah,
with bullets.
exactly.
But your friends weren't as lucky.
Right.
So now, as a teenager, you're going to funerals.
Right.
You're losing your friends, and these are your homies. These are the guys, your brothers.
Right.
They're in the same gang, and you know you're going through this trauma as a young man,
Right.
going through all this. And I guess at 16, you were thinking about leaving the gang, but you described it as it's like telling a Catholic to stop being a Catholic.
Right. Yeah, you start taking a moral inventory of your life at that time. And it was 16, but it felt like you were 20-something or 30-something because nobody was live past the age of 18. And I was already starting to reach that age. And I was like, man, am I even going to go ahead and make it to 18? People were living day by day. And I remember going to these funerals and me and a homie going and saying, man, you know, my home, you know, you put the rest in peace, you put the homie in the shirt. And then you're like, man, I hope it's not me next time. And a lot of times it was that person that was next. It was that person in the coffin. And I remember a specific story where a mom was trying to wake up his son in the coffin, trying to wake up a son. I remember another ordeal where another guy was being laid to rest, and the mom, she was being held back because she had to, she was trying to jump into the hole with him.
Sad. So you had a friend named Alex Sanchez,
Right.
and he was an MS-13 guy himself.
Correct.
And he approached you because he wanted to start a gang intervention group.
Right.
How old were you at the time?
I think I must have been like 21, early 20 or 21, early 20s.
Okay, so you've been banging for like 7.
Yeah, about 7, 8 years.
You've been banging for like 7 or 8 years.
Right.
What was it about Alex that convinced you to go through this whole system?
Well, I remember seeing Alex. You know, Alex was one of the persons that I used to always look out through the window, and you know that I felt that he had that respect, power, and pride as well when I was a kid before I even joined. I remember being a kid and seeing Alex in these carnivals, and he was everybody was just around him. Everybody wanted to be like him when he was in the gang, if you will. And then when I got, when he approached me, you know, he had this level of respect within the gang as well. So right there, it kind of clicked like, man, is this guy is saying not to do it, you know, that it's not worth it. And I'm seeing how comfortably he's doing this and nobody's messing with him because he's doing this stuff to go ahead and leave the lifestyle. Maybe I'll go ahead and give it a chance. But the first initial was, you know, I was already used to this stuff, to being from the gang. So the first initial was I was already in this addiction lifestyle where my whole world consisted of just going over in my head, MS, 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 and I'm going to go ahead and try to fight or be the enemy of anybody else. But, you know, I eventually went to the group.
So joining this group, which was, now this is Homies Unidos?
Right.
The early incarnation of it.
Right.
Does that mean that you had to leave MS-13?
I think during that time, it wasn't necessarily about that. It was more of stopping violence and drugs and trying to be a person that doesn't commit those crimes as well. So if you tell somebody initially, you know, go ahead and leave MS-13, you have to go ahead and show them what is the opportunity ahead. You have to bring them within the circle, if you will, for him to go ahead and leave. So it was kind of him putting people and talking about Homies Unidos and then just going. Then if you wanted to go ahead and leave the gang afterwards, then you definitely had that choice.
I mean, in MS-13, are you allowed to leave? Is it blood in, blood out, like the Mexican mafia? Or can you just say, hey, I don't want to do this anymore, and everyone just wishes you well?
I think when you talk about MS-13, you talk about the demographics of El Salvador, then the East Coast, then the demographics in California. But when you get onto it, I mean, I definitely didn't put in a 2-week notice or anything like that. You know, I didn't tell people, hey, you know, I kind of faded away somewhat like if it was a bad relationship. When you're breaking hooking up with a girl or whatever, or vice versa, and they're hitting you up, and you start answering those calls. If they're gonna be there, or I'm gonna go ahead and be over here, and you would think it was MS-13. It's a lot more difficult to go ahead and do that. But as soon as we started going to the neighborhood, I think as we started hearing, expressing ourselves without using drugs and violence, and seeing the opportunity that Homies Unidos had, I think we started egging each other on instead of saying, hey, let's go over here, beat this person up or beat this person up. Probably let's not go ahead and do that. But you could definitely fade away from the gang, and not just MS-13. I mean, I think there was a study done, I think it was 70,000, right? Or it might have been 700,000, that I saw a study from the University of Boulder that's the amount of people that are leaving gangs each year.
Okay, so now you're part of Homies Unidos.
Right.
And you feel like you're no longer gang banging, but the police see it otherwise.
Right.
And you're sort of in the middle of the whole Rampart police district,
Right.
which ultimately ended up being the most corrupt police force in America.
Right.
And you start getting pulled over on your way to meetings.
Mm-hmm.
You start getting beat up by the police.
Correct. It was the same officers that was stopping us and frisking us when we were from MS, and believe me, we definitely weren't no angels. But it's for some reason they probably believed that we couldn't change, or we didn't have that opportunity, or doing the corrupt ways. They would just continue to use the strategy and the strategy. There was no strategy of saying, okay, now this guy's not from MS. These people are not from MS. How do you deal with them? We were still being dealt as that. And then they took a very disliking to Homies Unidos, because now we had the backing of Senator Tom Hayden. And we used to, tell him the stuff that was going on the streets, and we started organizing with him against police brutality. So there was a time in the neighborhood where the police stopped you, they asked you, are you from MS-13 or are you from Homies Unidos? And people will raise their hands, okay, I'm from Homies Unidos, okay, you're going to jail. Who's from MS-13? Other people started raising their hands, okay, you guys can go ahead and leave.
Well, you guys actually ended up suing
Right.
the police department.
Correct.
And they settled for 6 figures.
Mm-hmm.
Can you say how much?
Well, it was 6 figures that consisted of between a certain amount of people. But what I ended up getting, it was a few thousand.
Okay.
Right. It wasn't more than 5,000 or nothing.
Okay, so you didn't really make nothing of
Yeah.
it. So then you decided to move to Colorado in 2002.
Correct. And the reason that I moved to Colorado was because when the Rampart crash would go ahead and see me in the neighborhood, they would go ahead and say, hey, Clever, I'm like, what's up? This media attention's gonna die. They would say, homie, this media attention's gonna die, homie. We're gonna come after you. And that's exactly what happened. Because in the media attention, I remember walking down the street with the likes of Gerardo Rivera, and I'm talking to him about police brutality. When it consisted of Time Magazine, there was this lady from Time Magazine that came take pictures, and she's like, man, there's no police brutality. I'm like, yeah, because you're a white lady with a camera, that they're not going to stop. Go inside the liquor store, and as soon as the cops pass, they're going to come right now. So she went inside the liquor store, and sure enough, the cops came, and they put us all against the wall. And then she came out, like blaze of glory, just taking pictures of the cops. We're going to take your camera away. You're not going to take my camera away. And then I'm like this, and I told her, okay, that's enough. And then she stopped and she left, and the cops looked at me. Damn, Clary, you got some pull. Whoa, who was that? And then a couple of days later, they were on the Time Magazine, and it said Gangsta Cops with an A and the end. It said Homies Unidos 1, LAPD 0. So it was almost like a scorekeeping thing, if you will.
So it became a war with the cops.
It became us fighting for our civil rights.
Yeah.
And exposing the stuff that has been going in the communities for generations upon generations that people didn't believe was exposing. A big exposure that started people to believe stuff is what happened during the Rodney King, when he was brutally beat by the sheriff's department, if you will. So it was kind of exposing the same stuff that I saw growing up and just putting it out there to the media.
Okay, so basically, since you're a target of the police, you decided to move to Colorado.
Correct.
Okay. This was 2002.
Right.
Was there an MS-13 presence in Colorado during that time?
I believe not, because we moved to Aurora, and we moved to Denver, and our main thing wasn't to look what gangs were around there. Our main thing was, how do we get away from this police brutality? My son was about 2 years old. What is the best life that I could go ahead and give for my son? And should I go to college, or should I go ahead and get a job? And where am I going to live at?
Okay, so you end up getting an associate's degree in criminal justice.
Correct.
In 2004.
Right.
You had a wife.
Right.
And you had 2 kids.
Right.
At a certain point. You guys lived in an apartment.
Mm-hmm.
She worked in a preschool.
Mm-hmm.
And you were a bouncer in a club.
Yeah, so I worked part-time as a bouncer, and I also worked as a youth counselor in a mental health institution and in a juvenile halfway house.
Got it. So here you have this whole new life.
Right.
You got a family. You don't have cops, frisking you down. You're not getting shot at.
Right.
You start a whole new life. But an MS-13 presence was in Colorado during that time, and police started a whole investigation around that. I guess around 2009, prosecutors said they actually squashed the MS-13 presence in Colorado. Mm-hmm. And there was a 3-year investigation, mm-hmm. and you got arrested.
Right.
On drug and conspiracy charges.
Correct.
They claimed that you were an MS-13 leader and a shot caller. In fact, they said that you went out to Colorado specifically to start a whole new faction
of MS, right?
Of MS-13. How did it feel to move away from LA and all the craziness to a whole new place, start a whole new life, and next thing you know, boom? Because you actually, from the time that you were arrested from Juvenile, you had never been arrested as an adult.
Correct.
Up to that point. So you were clean.
Right.
And then boom, now you're back in a jail cell again.
Right. Right. And to go to of how that went, specifically down as well, to add to that was when I moved to Colorado, they said that there was an MS presence. There was an MS presence. First, a friend over there was a former MS member. He asked me if I wanted to go ahead and move over because I told him about the police brutality, and I went there. And then other people started go there, 5 or 6, 7 people, and these people were people that weren't going over to go ahead and get their jobs. There was no drug dealing or drug trafficking, if you will, right? But I believe that they said that the investigation started I believe they said 2009, or it might have started in 2006, and a lot of that stuff is to eliminate that I was there from 2002. So that's 7 years, and there is no MS. The MS-13 presence that they're talking about allegedly is about 6 or 7 people, if you will. So there is no presence, but the reason that they said that we were there in 2009 was to eliminate those other 7 years where I was pretty much just working.
Yeah.
And the way that it happened was that for a LAPD officer was the one that followed me to Colorado and didn't let the courts know that, if you will. So I believe that my investigation had started by the FBI already when I was already walking down the street with the likes of Gerardo Rivera or coming out in the media as well. But to answer your question of how that felt, I woke up I woke up the next day in the federal facility, and I was all over the news and the newspaper, and I was like the MS-13 leader. And I mean, that's the stuff that I wanted when I was 15, 16 years old.
Right.
Now I got my family, I'm 31, I'm like, whoa, what are you talking about? This has to be a mistake. And not only that, but people in the facility started running with it, like the CEOs or the other inmates. Wow, the leader of MS. So when you went to court, you were like extra security. And when I went to court, I was like, okay, this has to be a mistake. They're gonna let me out right now. And it didn't happen like that.
Well, your phone lines were actually tapped.
Right.
And there was a call between you and a guy named Enrique Lacayo.
Mm-hmm.
Lacayo. And in the phone call, he said that there was going to be a hit against somebody
mm-hmm.
in Los Angeles.
Right.
Lacayo was recently released from a California prison. And I guess he was telling you on the phone that MS-13 and the Mexican Mafia leaders in Pelican Bay had ordered a hit mm-hmm. on somebody.
Mm-hmm.
In the conversation, you said, this phone could be tapped,
mm-hmm.
and let's just put a delay on the hit so you can go to LA and talk about it,
mm-hmm.
which in their eyes is Well, here you are talking about a murder, a potential murder. But in your eyes, you saw it a little bit differently. So can you talk about that whole situation?
Well, there was a lot of wiretap calls that also were misinterpreted, if you will. It was a conversation where somebody called me from the juvenile facility, and he told me what he had heard from somebody, right? And I said, okay, you know, having an experience in gang intervention, well, perhaps I could go ahead and go to LA to go ahead and try to stop this hit from taking place. Now, do I have the palabra or the authority to stop a hit from the Mexican mafia? Absolutely not.
Did you know the guy that was supposed to get hit?
Yeah.
Okay.
So
was he a friend of yours?
Yes.
Okay.
So I did knew him. And, you know, I talked to some certain people in LA, and they talked to their people, right? And that's what I lose the paper trail of that. And eventually, you know, there's rumors that it was just a rumor, that it wasn't gonna go ahead and happen anyways. And there's rumors that it just didn't happen. You know, somebody doesn't send you like a letter and says, okay, you know what, he's good, he's gonna be off. If it doesn't happen, it doesn't happen. So even that conversation right there, but those are the wiretap conversations that they manipulate in my bond hearing, if you will, portraying that conversation consisted of me saying, okay, I'm gonna go to LA and carry the hit myself. And that's what they used in the grand jury to go ahead and indict me as well. And there was dozens of calls like this, because every 30 days, the FBI needs a certain call that consists of drug trafficking or that you're committing a crime in order for the wiretap on your phone, if you will. So the investigator, the former LAPD officer that moved to Colorado to investigate me, he will make these calls to see me as the aggressor. And there was this other call where I would tell friends, hey, let's have a carne asada. Come bring, how many pounds should we buy? Buy like 10 pounds of carne asada and bring it to my house, and we're gonna go ahead and have a cookout. So apparently those 10 pounds meant keys, and we were gonna go ahead and do that. There was another one where there was this restaurant, and it's a Vietnamese restaurant, and I tell one of my friends, hey, where are you gonna go ahead and eat at? And that consisted of, let's go to this restaurant, the Vietnamese restaurant. I tell him, nah, you know what? You know, the waiter, he's always messing up my order, man. Let's go somewhere else. So there was still no drug trafficking. So he needs this call, again, to continue to wire to my phone. So he interpreted that the waiter was my connect, and I did not like the quality of the food, if you will, and let's go somewhere else. And just to finish there was another call where I did work at that nightclub. There was a friend's, you know, we had some beers. We went back home, and we were having some beers right there, and he ended up getting my phone that night. He ended up getting my phone that night. He started going down my list of the people from the club, and he started calling them and asking them actually for drugs, right? He wanted to get high. And then the next day, the people went ahead and called me the next day and complaining, hey man, there's all these, so-and-so called me for drugs, and why is he doing that? Like, I had to apologize to certain people, and when I was locked up and reading these wiretaps, the feds forgot to erase those calls because they erased when he was making the calls. Now, why did they erase when he was making the calls? Because I found this kingpin awash with drugs, and we're in my house. Why does he need to go somewhere else to look for dope? So that would ahead and stop the investigation. But it was wiretap calls in that nature where they were being manipulated against my advantage to go ahead and use against me, continue the wiretaps.
Well, Lacayo, along with talking about this potential hit on this guy you knew, he also talked about how he sliced a Sereno's throat with a razor in prison.
Well, it wasn't that one right there. It wasn't a Sereno. I believe it was a person from another gang.
Okay.
And I believe that he had just came out the shoe, and I asked him, why were you in the shoe? And he was telling me this story that he did. During the times where people are in the facility and they're around all this violence, your conversations are gonna go, I miss my mom, I miss my dad, I miss my kids. Oh, and by the way, this is the violence that's going on here. This is the means that the survival mode, unfortunately, that's going on.
Still fairly reckless to talk like this over the phone.
Well, in a sense, absolutely. But again, it was the person where I answered the phone call, and they're telling me this information, if you will. And him, the only reason that I went ahead and answered some type of phone call like that was because it was a childhood friend that I grew up with. But for me to go ahead and say that, we were talking like this and we were plotting killings or we were plotting hits, it's totally, false.
Well, I guess there was another part of these tape phone calls where I guess you spoke about attacking a man who was supposed to be an informant, and you said they need to send this guy to hell because he doesn't belong to the two letters, two letters being MS.
Right. Again, that phone call right there was also taken out of proportion as well, and didn't go down like that. I've looked for that wiretap call as well, and I believe the liking of that didn't consist of me saying stuff like that. It was something that I went ahead and heard.
Okay.
So I was almost like the third person saying the thing of a story that I heard.
Well, with all these wiretaps and all these investigations, you were facing 48 years.
48 years, yeah.
And you were how old?
I was 31, I believe.
Okay, so you're basically looking at potentially dying in prison.
Right.
With a sentence like that. While you're in prison, your wife divorces you. Mm-hmm. Because she assumed you were never getting out.
Right.
And she gets engaged to another man.
Right.
Was that the worst part?
I think that was the numbing part of it, where I already knew you're expecting the worst of that stuff. And I remember her visiting me, and after that year, it did look like I was gonna go ahead and get that. Like, there was just so much corruption within the case that it did look like that. And, I told her, do whatever's best for you and the kids. And, I cannot blame her, because there was times the feds, in order to get you first, try to break you down, they want to go ahead and break down whatever your support system is. And she was my support system right there. My kids were the support system, if you will. So what they started doing, they started stopping her for no reason, giving her these tickets. When she would go home in the apartment that we lived in, they would go ahead and call the manager saying she was with this MS-13 leader. She would come back, and her furniture and my kids' toys and all the beddings was outside of the apartment.
Wow.
So it was times where I told her, you have to do what's best for you and the kids. I got me. I'll go ahead and fight my case right here. And after a year, it was she didn't visit or anything like that. And I think that was the best, because even to the conversations or the calls, I didn't want them to go ahead and twist my words either, in a sense where they're twisting my words to try to get some more evidence like that. So yeah, I did get out, and she was engaged to somebody else.
Yeah, that's tough.
Yeah, and you get out, and as long as my kids are good, she's good, I'm not gonna go ahead and any remorse over that stuff. It is what it is.
Well, you spent 2 years fighting this case.
Right.
Locked up the whole time.
Yeah.
I guess you tattooed the United States versus Gerardo Lopez on the back of your head.
Right.
You still have that tattoo?
I do.
Yeah. Well, you've grown your hair out.
Well,
You can't see it
that.
anymore.
When I was getting that tattoo, I was like, maybe I'll go ahead, just fade it up. So I did it kind of like that. But when I got that tattoo, I looked at the indictment, and when I looked at the indictment, it says United States of America
That's the first
versus
line.
Gerardo Lopez. And I was like, what? I was like, oh, well, first of all, I'm from United States of America. How are you going against me? Now you have a whole United States of America. You have all these resources, and also, and that's why I got it. And also, when I used to go to court, they would just bring up MS-13 political stuff from all of the United States, saying that and I was like, what does that have to do with me? So I was like, let's stop talking about the MS stuff. What is the charges that you actually have on me? And as time went on, there was none.
Well, you were actually offered a 4-year plea deal.
Right.
And your own lawyer told you to take it, because with 2 years time served, good behavior, you would have gotten out in a couple months.
I was already down 2. I would have been in a halfway house, and probably about a few months after that.
And your own lawyer was telling you to take this,
Right.
because you're facing 48 years.
Right.
And you actually turned it down.
Right.
Because you felt you were 100% innocent.
Absolutely.
And then out of nowhere, they just dismiss all the charges.
Yeah. And let me tell you how that went down. Well, when you're federally indicted, the feds have like a 99.9, 99.8 conviction rate. And you would think that these are convictions after convictions after convictions that go to trial.
These are plea deals.
Not. These are all plea deals, and that's why that's so high. And the reason that people don't want to take it to the box to trial is because the sentencing guidelines are too high.
Yeah.
You either get 10 years or you lose in trial and get those 48. Right, they hit you, and you have the gang things, MS-13, if you will.
Yeah.
They're trying to deem you as an MS-13 gang member again. They try to hit you with the high end. Now, I would have thought that my first attorney, would have represented me accurate and got the case dismissed. But his main thing, without looking at the case, was go ahead and take that plea deal. So I have a little bit of criminal justice background, with my degree, but nothing in a sense that would be able to represent you in court. So I started going to the law library in the feds. I started going to the law library and studying my case for, 8-hour days, 10-hour days. Then I was in the feds, and I got into a fight in there that was self-defense, and they sent me to the hole, and then it sent me to the court within there to go ahead and fight the defense charge. And they shot me to a county jail, Jefferson County Jail in Colorado, and I believe that a lot of that consisted was because my attorney was probably sharing information with the U.S. attorney. They were like, this guy's probably breaking the case. Now, why would your attorney do that? Because in the federal sentencing guidelines, the attorneys want to go ahead and have a good relationship with the prosecution for future bargaining deals. They don't want to climb up that mountain of studying hundreds of thousands of wiretaps.
You had a court-appointed attorney?
It was a court-appointed attorney, but it was a pro bono from a private attorney because every certain year they have to do these pro bono cases.
But that's still very different than having $100,000 that you're paying a top-notch lawyer to that is going to basically tear the prosecution apart.
Yeah, absolutely.
This is a guy. Now I've seen the difference.
Right,
pro bono or not, it's very different than the guys that spend $500,000 defending themselves.
Right, absolutely. Yeah. So there I am, and I started to write my own court motions because I started bringing out all the evidence that they were having against me in the grand jury that consisted of them flipping my words around and making it seem like I was dealing dope, on all the lies that they said to the grand jury to get me indicted. So I started doing this stuff, and I started shooting it to my attorney, and he didn't want to present it in court. So I ended up trying to fire him, and the judge didn't let me fire him, so he excused himself from the case. Mm-hmm. And then I get a second attorney who sees you like, man, Gerardo, this is so much corruption. There is that guy from the LAPD did follow you from LA to over here. It's retaliation for you coming out in the media and exposing the Rampart crash scandal. That's what it is. And so that goes on, and I'm just in my room just studying law, and eventually I started writing my own court motions and representing myself in court. And that's when my attorney came, that he was still on the case when I was going pro se, and he told me, okay, Gerardo, they offered you these 48 months. And at that time, I'm telling you, man, guilty or not, you want to take it. You want to take it because it's 48 months or 48 years, guilty or not. He's like, you got until 12 o'clock today to call my office and take this deal. So I go back to my jail cell, man. And by this time, I'm not saying that I was this tough guy within the jail cell saying, I broke down a lot of times, mentally, physically, emotionally. I knew that I probably wasn't ever going to go ahead and see, my kids or be able to come out. But it was almost like a Rocky Balboa fight. I remember me watching Rocky all the time. These movies where he got knocked down like 30 times and he ended up getting up in the end and winning. So I was looking at the phone to go ahead and call him, and it was 12 o'clock. It passed by, and I kind of knocked on the door so the CO could let me out, but not very lightly and purposely. And then the time passed, and I was like, man, now I really gotta go. Now I really gotta go ahead and fight this. And then he came the next day, and he's like, you didn't call my office. And I was all like, no, I didn't. And he was all like, well, now they say that they're going to go ahead and extend it till today to 12 o'clock. You got it. I'm like, man, this is like a damn game show. Door number 1, door number 2, door number 3. What do you got, Bob? So I was like, man. And I was like, man, I got them. And like, we're going to go to the motions hearing.
Right, well, because they wanted a conviction on the record.
They wanted to convict me because they was portrayed on the news, and my attorney knew they wanted that conviction. And a lot of times they want to go, and my own attorney told me, you know what, Gerardo, take the deal. I was like, no, there's some more evidence here. He was like, no, they're going to come after me. I was like, dude, you're my attorney. attorney. You're supposed to go ahead and represent me to a due process of law, adequate counsel. So we go to the trial. The motion serves to a trial, and he doesn't put the government on the stand. And this is the motion to dismiss the case. This is the motion to dismiss the wiretap. All kinds of different motions. He doesn't put the government on the stand. And the judge denied almost every motion. But it was weird that he didn't deny the motion to dismiss, which was the biggest one. And then I go back to my jail cell and I was like, why didn't you put the government on the stand? He told me because they already got caught lying. They could go ahead and lose their jobs, if you will. And that's when I started writing more motions. And 2 weeks later, they opened up that cell door to do that, and they let me free. And then as I start remembering of how that went down, the reason that judge started denying all the motions is for people not to. It could be also one for people not to be that happened something similar to it, for them not to be able to use my case law as well. And thousands of people would have been freed. I mean, this court thing had all kinds of different.
It was set a precedence, basically.
Oh man, it had all kinds of different things that people doing, life sentences for something that they didn't do, they could go ahead and use. And it was also to try to go ahead and block my my civil suit as well. So I get out, and then I'm trying to look for an attorney to get the civil suit, and everybody told me the same thing, all the same attorneys. Look, we could sue the cops, but I'm not going after the feds because then they're going to go ahead and come after us. Or I'm having this case, and I don't want to piss off the feds for this client over here. So a lot of times I was blackballed within having the suit. And then eventually I did get an attorney, and he filed like a one-page. It was cool that he had the courage to file something, but it was like a one-pager, and the government came back with like a 30 or 40-page rebuttal. All the attorneys and the FBI agents, the government appoints them an attorney. Then they had attorneys of their own as well.
Yeah. So you walk out of that jail cell. You're no longer married.
Right.
Are your kids still in the area, or they moved away?
I have no clue. I haven't had contact with them for like a year. My friend picked me up. And before I left, I was like, all right, I'm free, I'm getting out. They didn't take me to court. The judge signed they didn't have the audacity, the decency to take me to court and apologize. It's almost like you won the Super Bowl and there was nobody there to go ahead and see that, right? So they try to close it off. So they signed the paper to release me. The CO came, hey, Gerardo, your case is over the Denver Post. It got dismissed. I get out. I have my, whatever legal documents, and I walk out. And people right there, whether they liked it or not, everybody just starts cheering, right? Everybody starts cheering. I get out. And before I'm getting out, the CO tells me, oh, Gerardo, we have a problem. I'm like, what's up? He's all like, there's this ticket of like $500 that's holding you back. I'm like, really? You guys have been doing it 48 years. And I was on a jailhouse lawyer mode. And I was like, the reason that I wasn't able to pay that ticket was because I've been locked up and it accumulated to $500. So I called my friend right here, over here, sitting down out here next to me. And he went ahead and he paid the ticket for me,
Sure.
And I get out, and he was the one that told me. I was like, hey, take me to my mom's house. To my wife's house. I want to see my kids. And she's all like, hey, man, you haven't heard? I'm like, what's up? You're like, yeah, she's engaged to somebody else. You're gonna come and live with me. I got, an extra room. And I was all like, man, and everything's going through your head. Is this real? Is this really happening? I just beat this case, and you're going through all that. And I was like, all right, well, let's go. And then it consisted of me being coming out, and even the PTSD from that event. I just started seeing cars following us behind us, me going to the place where I start looking up at the ceilings, thinking that everything's just wiretapped, if you will. I remember my friends come out, friends that, they don't gangbang. They're like, oh, people still call people by their nicknames, whether you're from the gang or not. Clever's out. Okay, man, we're going to have a carne asada. I'm going to bring 20 pounds of carne asada. like, no. And it consisted of, we wait for the Dodgers to go to Coors Field to place the Rockies. And I remember when they were trying to take it, some friends trying to take it to the Rockies games. Hey, we got 4 tickets. You want to come with us? I'm like, what do you mean by tickets? Now, we're going to go sit in this aisle. We're going to have fun. So I'm going through specifics. After a time, my phone never rang. They were like, this fool's tripping. Yeah. We ain't going to go ahead and call him.
Well, your friend Alex Sanchez, the one that actually convinced you to leave the gang, he ultimately was indicted in 2009 on racketeering charges. And the investigators said that he lived a double life, that he was participating on the criminal side of the gang life while publicly condemning it.
Right.
Is he still locked up?
No, Alex beat his case.
Oh, he actually beat his case.
Absolutely.
You think it was retaliation in the same way that?
Well, it was well during that time when the Rampart Crash scandal, since he was the leader of Homies Unidos, the Rampart Crash figure. We get rid of Alex, and get him out of here, deport him. Then that's the end of Homies Unidos. That's when I stepped up and became the face of Homies Unidos, if you will. But yeah, he was. They violated. The LAPD violated Special Ordinance 40, which means they cannot turn over nobody into the INS. So he was in INS custody, and that's when we had the likes of Senator Tom Hayden to back us up. We have people, even celebrities, things in that nature. So that was retaliation because of that, because he was the first ex-gang member to get political asylum right here in the United States. So he was going through that stuff as well. And it's very similar from his case to my case in the wiretap stuff, where they started twisting his words as well. And anything that we said, I couldn't say, even if you're messing around with somebody, to a friend, because I have this MS associate, I can't go ahead and say, yeah, man, that guy needs a real ass kicking, man. Or you know what? God damn, I hate that guy. All of a sudden, it's pursued, where all of a sudden that means a hit. But no, he ended up beating his case a few months after I beat my case. I was number one in my case in my indictment. And when I beat my case number one in my indictment, everybody from my case, all of their charges were also dismissed.
So
and I believe there was
a domino effect.
Yeah,
basically.
it was a domino effect. And I believe there was some guy that he was even tired of fighting the case, where he actually pleaded guilty, and they even took back his guilty plea. Right? Say, no, you guys just get out of here. Right? And after that, when I was trying to talk to the media, who's gonna want to talk to you when you're a former MS member? Who the hell cares that you just went and that you continue to be stereotype, and you constantly have to walk on these eggshells, if you will, because all they have to say is, this guy's a former MS-13 member, and he really is meaning what he's saying when he just said, hey, yeah, that guy needs to get his ass kicked.
Well, it's now 2020.
Right.
You did your jail time, only to be found innocent. You no longer consider yourself MS-13.
Absolutely not.
But you still have the tattoos.
Well, there was tattoos. If you see the ones on my neck, I had some laser treatment. So I went ahead and took those off, if you will. And it was about 15 sessions. And they go away within 8 sessions. But for whatever ink was, it was probably some hard ink. So it goes. And every time when you take off these tattoos, I take kids that were in gangs with me to go through that process, that they want to go ahead and take their tattoos off. Because it's not just taking off your tattoos. It's someone stripping your identity, right? And what else are you going to go ahead and replace it? So I took off all the visible ones. And the other ones, I'm collaged from the chest all the way down to my stomach. I mean, the pain to go ahead and take that off is too gruesome. But I've learned all the time, sometimes when I'm in the spotlight, that okay, now he took off his MS-13 tattoos. Now what could we go ahead and find on him, Look at the way he talks. Look at the way he expresses himself, right? Is he still part of it? Or, you start going to that stuff like that. And then the real one that starts to get was like, well, you know what? Well, he's still, a minority. Then they start attacking your race, if you will. Then it goes to the situation of, okay, then who am I? And that's when I tell the kids also, when they take off their tattoos, or the people that join gangs, that's why they join gangs, because they continue to be oppressed a lot of times by the local culture, where they don't have no sense of identity, if you will, and they feel that they have to go ahead and join a band because they're being oppressed like that.
Well, and I had heard that removing a tattoo is way more painful than actually getting it.
No, Vlad, it's like 5, 6, 7 times more painful, homie. It's hard. And my skin is sensitive, so my thing puffs up like big time. There was kids that I took, that there were these hard cholos and everything, and I took them, and as soon as they see how my skin puffs up, I look farther like, hell no, we're gone. And then you have to go ahead and talk to them. Hey, it's gonna be okay. I don't know, man. So it's to that nature where it does hurt, and it's just not one treatment. You got to go every 6 weeks.
Yeah. Well, Gerardo Lopez, it was a hell of a story, and you went through a lot to get to this point. a lot of losses, a lot of pain, but it seemed like you still have a good demeanor about the whole thing. It seems like the U.S. government never broke you, you know,
Well,
and it's broken a lot of people.
right,
A lot of people get into this prison system and, you know, like that one kid, Junior, that they try to kill themselves.
right,
They can't go through that type of
right,
hardship. It seems like you got through and you came out a stronger person.
right,
And not only did you leave the gang mentality, but you actually are now leading an organization, Homies Unidos, that's actually helping other people follow in your footsteps as well. So, you know, I'm definitely proud of where you are in life right now, and you know, I'm expecting much greater things for you in the future.
Thank you, man. I appreciate you, Vlad, for reaching out and wanting to have this interview. And, I like to say, I talk a lot of negativity because it consists of the story, talking about the police or the government. But, during this time, I have done presentations where I have met good police officers, right? It's
Yeah.
not all of them are bad. I have met, people that have came to U.S. attorneys that have came to apologize and say they didn't have nothing to do with my case. I've sat in chambers with federal judges talking about law that they have invited me. I've done presentations for U.S. attorneys that they do for the defense attorneys on how to humanize their clients who are facing the death penalty, so they won't go ahead and kill off. So I understand that it wasn't everybody, and I can't go. Hate is hate. I can't hold on to hate and then teach somebody, a kid, to get out of a gang if you continue to have that hate. And I've gone to the extent also of being fortunate to sit on the district attorney's law enforcement and community relations council in Denver, to go ahead and build more of a better bridge between law enforcement and a community also, on how to go ahead and relate to each other more, how to have that respect also. And I'm also a mayor appointed commissioner for the city of Denver as well. So anything is possible when you continue to grow and continue to proceed,
I love it, man. I love to hear stories like this, man. Well, I wish you all the best.
Thank you, Vlad. I appreciate it. And thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. Until next time.
Right on.
Peace.